What are your first memories of United States politics? Maybe you remember going to the polls with your parents on election day. Maybe your first memories come from something you learned in school, a picture you saw in a textbook, or something one of your teachers or classmates said. Maybe politics wasn't something that was talked about in your family, and your knowledge of US politics came from something you saw on TV or read in the newspaper. When I think of my first memories of US politics, 3 specific memories come to mind. The first is the 2000 presidential election, at the turn of the century. I was 5 years old, and I do remember actually being pretty excited to find out who the next president would be. I remember sitting at the foot of my parents' bed, watching the election results roll in on TV. I was pretty thrilled to find out who the winner would be, but I was suddenly pretty bummed when I found out I had to go to sleep early. We actually wouldn't know who the president would be until a few days later that year. Spoiler alert, Al Gore does not win. My second memory comes from around the same time, when I was 4 or 5 years old. Before I was old enough to go to school, I would eat my breakfast and lunch on a placemat very similar to this one. A placemat of the presidents of the United States of America. I would eat my grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup lunches with the eyes of 42 middle-aged or older white men staring at me. This was more than just a placemat. This was my first exposure to our nation's issue with representation in politics. I was not yet even 5 years old, and I was already thinking, well, maybe if you aren't white and you aren't a man, you aren't even allowed to be the president. A few years later, when I was 11 or 12, in the 5th or 6th grade, I was at my best friend's house when her grandma asked me, "Hilary, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Well, naturally, like all elementary schoolers, I said, "I think I want to be a politician." Her response was not what I was expecting to hear. She said, "You don't really want to be like one of those crooked politicians, do you?" I had no idea what to say or to think. I was hurt. I was upset because in my mind, at that age, a politician was a leader, someone who wanted to make a difference in their communities and to help others. These memories from my childhood so early on helped me to form my opinions and my beliefs related to leadership, politics, and government. You see, growing up, we are constantly absorbing information from our surroundings, from the people in our households, our family and friends, our teachers, and our classmates. Trust me, this is no different for kids today. In my free time, I volunteer at elementary schools, talking to kids about voting and the democratic process. 6-year-olds talk to me about the current administration's proposed border wall. 5th graders tell me that when they are someday elected to office, that they will end the drug epidemic in West Virginia. These kids are so in tune with the problems in our communities and what's happening in the world today. And it's not just because of what they see on TV, but also because of the conversations we have when we are around them. Full-time, I work for a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization called Inspire US. We work to support high school students to register their peers to vote and get them out to the polls. Students as young as 14 and 15 years old are registering their peers to vote because they see voting as a responsibility. Yet, when they log on to Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media platform kids use these days, they see politics portrayed as destructive, divisive, and us versus them. Aside from just working with young people, look at me. I'm a young person myself. I'm 23 years old, a millennial, and part of the new largest voter-eligible age group in the United States. As a young voter, I want to see adults and older generations setting a better example for the types of conversations we need to be having about politics and the ways that we are engaging in politics in our communities. And as an adult, I love to see kids and young people inspired and empowered to talk about politics and empowered to be leaders in their communities. So that's why my big idea, my idea worth sharing, is that we must spearhead a shift in our political culture to change the way we view and talk about politics so that we are encouraging each other, not deterring one another from getting involved in politics. Right now, we are living in a very divided political climate. Now is not the time to neglect your civic health or the civic health of the young people in your lives. Lucky for you all, I've developed an easy 3-step, not plan, but dream, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to change the way you think about, talk about, and participate in politics. Step 1, change the way you perceive politics. We often see politics as black and white, or rather, blue and red. Many of us find a party we tend to agree with and then tend to stick to that side. Public distrust in our government is at an all-time high. Some of this has to do with legislative gridlock and politicians' unwillingness to compromise. But what if we as citizens and as constituents change that narrative? What if we start talking about politics as issue-based and not party-based? What if the conversation wasn't about who was a Democrat and who was a Republican, but about the problems we see in our communities and how we can actually work together to compromise and to solve them? Honestly, I've never met a single person whose ideals and morals are 100% completely defined by one party or another. So let's not pigeonhole ourselves. Let's open up our minds to talking about the issues, not just the parties. Step 2, evolve the way we discuss politics. I know, it's so taboo to even imagine talking about politics in the workplace, even though that is where some of us spend a majority of our time. I previously mentioned this divided political climate. Because of that, we aren't eager to have these uncomfortable conversations. But if we aren't talking about current events and we aren't talking about the news, what type of example are we setting for our kids, our grandkids, our students, and our siblings? Everyone has that friend or that family member who posts so fervently on social media about their political opinions. It's so awkward because you know they completely disagree with you. You just want to avoid them at all costs at a family gathering. But I challenge you to take that step to actually spark a conversation related to politics. Step 1 when talking politics is to listen to their perspective. Sometimes it can be hard, but to foster productive civil discourse, we have to lend our ears. Step 2 is to be engaged. Try to actually understand where they're coming from. What experiences have you had that have led you to believe this or think this way? Step 3 is to present your point of view. When you're sharing opinions, you have every right to contribute to the conversation as well. So don't be afraid to share your experiences. And the last step is definitely the most important. It's to find common ground. Having civil discourse, talking about politics, talking to someone who disagrees with you is not necessarily to agree with them, but to realize that we all have different backgrounds and we all have differing opinions. But I believe deep down that many of us all want the same things for ourselves, for our families, and for our societies. Having these conversations is not necessarily to agree, but to acknowledge that we're all different. Step 3 is probably the most important. Everyone knows the saying that actions speak louder than words. I don't think it could be more important when it comes to politics. We participate in our communities in different ways, but some of us feel as though our voices don't matter. In fact, that's a huge battle I have when going into high schools. Kids say that their vote doesn't make a difference, when in reality it does. There are elections all the time that are determined by a single vote in our communities. There's actually a recent story out of Virginia. I'm not sure if any of you have heard or read about this. But in Virginia, in the November election, in a single House district, the Democratic candidate won by a single vote. Then a ballot was found, and on that ballot, the voter had voted for the Republican candidate. A panel of judges ruled this ballot to be valid, and so it counted in the race, bringing this race to an even tie. And in Virginia, in the case of a tie, you pull a name out of a bowl. So they pulled the name out of the bowl, and the Republican candidate won. Now, this isn't just any race. The Virginia House race, in which a name was drawn out of a bowl, it determined whether or not the House would stay in Republican control or if it would break 50-50. So now it's 51-49, and the Republicans are in control in Virginia. This is the power of one vote, of your voice. I realize that some people don't participate in politics and that we all have different ways that we want to get involved. 2018 is an election year, so I encourage you, if you do vote, please take a child or a young person with you and show them how the process works. I work with high school students who honestly don't understand sometimes, and sometimes it takes an older person just teaching them the process and talking to them about voting. Perhaps you're very politically active and you want to attend a rally or volunteer on a campaign. These are also great opportunities to engage young people in these activities. Maybe you choose to protest or petition. These are your rights, and it's so important that we talk to our young people about those rights that we have in the United States. And if you don't want to participate in any of these ways, you can always watch a debate or stay up to date in the news and encourage conversation. Ask those kids in your lives, what did you think about this event? Or what do you think about this issue? I'm around kids all the time, and trust me, they are always eager to give you their opinion and their ideas. I know it might seem trivial, and I know that some of you might not apply any of this to your life. Some of you might give this a second thought when you leave tonight. But I encourage you to change the way you participate in politics by just a bit in this election year. Engage a child or a young person in your family or someone you know in these important, sometimes uncomfortable conversations. You never know, a young kid, a young person in your life that you know might someday want to be on a placemat themselves.